Welcome to the Matthew Moran podcast. Here you will find a series of in-depth conversations with the world's best nature photographers, filmmakers, conservationists, editors, writers, and publishers. You will get an insight into the lives of creative professionals and industry experts. It is a chance to hear their stories, personal journeys, and how they carve a niche to make a living. The podcast focuses on the role that photography and filmmaking plays in helping to raise awareness about the global plight of species, and despite the depressing statistics, we look for solutions of what we can all do to contribute to conservation. All my guests give up their precious time and are incredibly generous in spirit. So this is my chance to share these conversations with you, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. This week, my guest is Chris Packham. Chris is a broadcaster, naturalist, writer, photographer, filmmaker, conservationist, and campaigner. He presents BBC's BAAFTA award-winning Springwatch, Autumnwatch and Winterwatch series, and numerous other documentaries covering a broad range of subjects from honeybees to Tyrannosaurus Rex. More recently, Chris has presented programs on punk rock music and the global population issues facing us today. When he's not broadcasting, photographing, or taking his dogs for a walk, Chris works tirelessly campaigning for wildlife and habitat protection both in the UK and abroad. Along with his stepdaughter Megan, Chris is on the verge of launching a new venture called Wildlife Rebellion. The mission here is simple: to tell the truth about the critical state of biodiversity loss and habitat destruction, and to demand peacefully and legally that government act now to protect biodiversity. In this episode, Chris talks about the buzz around launching Wildlife Rebellion and the creative ways they plan to reach millions of people to get involved in active conservation. He tells us about his unique approach to wildlife photography and the endless struggle to make the perfect image. We look at the fast-growing vegan movement, why young people need to be in contact with nature, and how Chris remains optimistic at a time when our negative impacts on the planet are relentless. If you enjoy this interview, please leave a review on iTunes, share it with your colleagues, friends, and loved ones so they can hear people like Chris and all my other guests who so generously give up their time to share their stories. That's enough from me. Here's Chris Packham. Chris, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Not at all. It's a topic close to my heart. I don't get much of an opportunity to discuss it. I live in a relatively isolated world when it comes to photography, but we'll probably get onto that because I quite like my isolated world when it comes to photography.
That's great. And I was thinking this morning before this interview that, you present to millions on Spring, Autumn and Winterwatch. You've been on Desert Island Discs and the Jimmy Fallon show. And now we're in a cafe in East London. How are you feeling?
Well, it's not the situation; it's the content that counts. Yeah, no, good. I'm okay at the moment. I'm a little bit more angry and frustrated than I normally am, and I like to maximally regulate my anger and frustration. I learned a long time ago to turn it into something positive. But over the last couple of days, I've been a little bit tetchy, to be quite honest with you. And this comes down to external factors. My dogs are now healthy, which is good. Everything's as happy as it ever is at home. Living with a menagerie of animals is never easy, so my partner and I have to manage that. But no, it's just external factors. And I've been reading some pretty hardcore books about climate recently as well. I had to speed read 6 of them. So they've tattooed me with an aura of doom, I'm afraid.
But you've got to be well informed if you're going to stand up there and talk about this stuff.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm always for using science as a firm foundation. If you've got your back against the wall and that wall is fact, then you're secure. I don't raise my cases and make my arguments based on emotional responses. I have an emotional response just like everyone else, but I'm very careful to make sure that my foundations are rooted in fact, basically.
That's brilliant. And of course, you're campaigning on so many fronts, and I was curious to find out about this new initiative you've started with your stepdaughter Megan called Wildlife Rebellion. Is that right?
Yeah, we haven't launched it yet. We've announced that we're going to do it. So I obviously was working and continue to work really closely with Extinction Rebellion. I'm a very keen supporter. I think they've done great things in a very short space of time, and I will continue to work with them. And now Animal Rebellion as well. But I think that one of the things that we realized was that Extinction Rebellion had done a brilliant job of raising the climate crisis to a broader part of the population. Animal Rebellion are now doing great things when it comes to farming and a need for more vegetable-based diet, etc., animal husbandry issues. But biodiversity loss, which is something which obviously is very close to my heart, although they were addressing it, they weren't able to put the impetus into that and get the traction that I think it requires. Particularly in the UK, where we have a great affinity for our wildlife. So Megan and I spoke to them all, and we had a conflab, and we said, look, we've got this idea. We want to employ different methods. We want to have the same objective, but employ different methods to see if we can't raise the issue of biodiversity loss. So we've got our first set of campaigns planned. We want to launch on a firm footing, so we're just polishing the first campaign. We're hoping that we can do that in mid-March. So our website has been built. It's looking good. We'll be fundraising alongside that, but we want to fundraise off the back of an imaginative initial campaign, and that's what we've been putting together. And because they're going to run thick and fast, that will be March. We've got another one for April. We've got another one for May, and another one for July. And Megan and I have been extremely busy meeting all sorts of people all over the place. One of the things we're keen to do is partner with people. I'm very keen on the whole approach of partnership. It doesn't work well within the NGOs. They're not very good. Their egos are too big, and they're not good at partnerships. We want to. We've got no ego. We need a result. It's not about Megan. It's not about Chris. It's not about Wildlife Rebellion. It's about getting a result. So we want to work with NGOs specifically chosen for each one of our campaigns, and to involve their membership as much as possible. We can be a bit naughtier than they can typically be, and we hope that will be a lure for them to join us. But also we want another partner, which is one which will allow us to spread our words outside our typical sphere of influence. So we're looking at sport. We've had meetings with various sporting bodies and governance organisations.
Why sport?
Well, because look, sport is a massive part of people's lives. I'm not into it personally, but a lot of people are football fans, tennis fans, cricket fans, rugby. Six Nations is on at the moment. All I hear about on the radio is Six Nations. I overhear conversations at work about Six Nations. All means nothing to me, but it engages a huge number of people. And if I can meet those people and start talking to them about the issues which concern me, I'm sure I'll find commonality. We're all the same species on the same planet with the same big problem, whether we're into football, rugby, or bird watching, frankly. So we're looking at initially at sports which use grass as a surface to play on. So whether they're pitches or courts or whatever. And one of our campaigns this year will be looking at wildflower meadows and verges, road verges, and so on and so forth. So we thought we'd go to people that need grass, and talk to them. And do you know what? We've had 3 meetings so far, and they couldn't have been more successful. People are really keen, and I think they realise that although there may be an apparent gulf in the need to communicate to their fans or participants, details of biodiversity loss and climate change and so on and so forth, it's there. All of these bodies that we've spoken to want to be more sustainable and communicative, and we're offering them the capacity to do that. We're bringing our expertise to them, and of course we're giving it to them for nothing. Yeah. There's no commercial concern here. We're looking for sponsorship to help cover our capital cost, and we will have some capital costs, obviously, but we're not out to make any money out of it.
Sure. And this is UK focused.
So we're starting. So our outreach will be global, but our campaigns are going to be UK to start with. Yeah. So we're not talking about polar bears and tigers and orangutans and all of that sort of stuff. We will be, but in terms of getting people to do things proactively, we're going to concentrate initially on our UK audience, if you like. And so our campaigns are globally facing, but they're domestically orientated.
That sounds so good. And so presumably people can find out about this, once it's launched, once you have the website.
Yeah, we've got the social media sort of trickling at the moment,
Yeah.
but we're really holding back. We're working with some other fantastic people, Lucy and Fabian, and they're young people who are extraordinarily able. We've had lots of people come to us, and the photographers have come and given us material and pledged that we can use all of their libraries and so on and so forth, which is great. And other people are coming to us and say, what can I do? What can I do? And we're just saying, just be patient. That we really want to start with a bang. We don't want to start fumbling. So I think we've got to come up with a good idea for an initial campaign. It's quite poignant. It's passive. No one's going to get arrested, but it's going to make a lot of people think. And as a consequence of that, as soon as we get going, then people can come to us, come to the website. There's a page already built where they can offer their volunteer services. And we don't want this to be a centrally run thing. We want this to disperse into the community of the UK. And
much like Extinction Rebellion in the way they
very
operate.
Much so.
Yeah.
They've got all of their local groups, and that's what we want to do. So and we'll provide the resources for them initially in terms of artwork, so on and so forth. And obviously they can take all of that, and then they can get their own projects going. But we're quite keen to give them a steer on how we think it can work. And we're going to be using, as I say, art, music, humour. One of our campaigns is entirely based around satire. And I've got some good comedians who've currently pledged their support and help, and they're going to be doing things for us. So we're going to make people laugh by telling them the truth about some pretty stiff things.
Yeah.
And when you think we have quite a good heritage of that in the UK with things like Spitting Image and so on and so forth. So it's that sort of social comment. It won't be new to people. Only this time it's not going to be about politics. It's going to be about biodiversity loss and climate.
Sure. Yeah, I often think that there's a lot wrong about the UK, but comedy we're good at, aren't we?
Yeah, we're good at laughing at ourselves. And actually we tend to tell the truth more through humour than we do when we're watching the news.
Yeah.
Basically. I don't know, the comedians seem to be able to really just, keep the sharp edge to their tongue. And I've always admired that, and I like it. And very often, they present the truth to us in a way that we find funny, but then later we sort of question, it's funny, but it's uncomfortable.
Yes.
And that's what I think we're aiming to do as well. So Extinction Rebellion, we'll carry on working with them, and they've got plans and change of ideas as well. But our niche will be slightly different. In that we want to explore these things. And the other thing is that our area of expertise is slightly different, in that the people that we're working with are media people, TV, social media, so on and so forth. So we're going to focus very much on that and the sorts of things that our output is going to be media-centric. So it won't necessarily be huge numbers of people coming to a site and complaining, but it will be output about something to huge numbers of people with punch. We're not going to pull any punches.
And that sounds like a really important message, because there's so much, it's like a tide of negativity when we're talking about the environment, we're talking about veganism, and it's an uphill battle. So if we can attack it with positivity rather than sounding like, we're ranting, then that message is going to come across a lot clearer.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, we've rung the bell. We've started to wake people up to the urgency and need to address this crisis. But at the moment, we haven't been offering them too many solutions. And that, in the end, becomes disempowering. And your audience will drift away and stick their heads back in the sand. So another part and parcel of our methodology will be for every tweet, every TikTok, everything we put out, there will be a go-to where people can do something themselves. Yeah. So we will be offering people the chance to engage with progress. We know that we're all part of the problem, but we want to make sure that we offer people the chance to be part of a solution.
Yes.
And that, I think, is critical. Now, whilst those solutions on an individual basis may be inconsequential, i.e. you and I are not going to save the world on our own, what they do, and what I think is very important, is that they empower us, and we feel that we are making a difference. And that is incredibly important when it comes to motivating people to make a bigger difference.
Yeah, because it gives people meaning and purpose.
Exactly. Yeah. That empowerment is really important. So, yeah, we've got a manifesto drafted by yours truly, and I'm holding everyone to it. And and it's not a megalomaniac thing. We're taking input as much as we can, and I've reached out to trusted people, and for their comment and advice and so forth. And in the end, we're going to get to that point where we pass it on to everyone to use their imagination and add to it as well. And that's our mission, and hopefully it'll work. Well, I think we've got at the moment, we've got some good ideas. What we haven't got is any money to make them happen. But, that's another part and parcel of, Meg's and our life at the moment. We seem to be having lots of meetings with people whereby we're looking for partners, not necessarily financial. We want access to databases so that we can pump our material out to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who we can't touch because they don't follow me on Twitter or any of other social media, and they don't watch Springwatch and those sorts of things. So we need new audiences.
Yeah. So you're saying there are people out there, Chris, that don't know who you are?
Well, I hope there are, because I'm not very important. But they don't need to know who I am. They need to know that we're in deep, deep trouble, and that they can do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, it sounds magnificent. And by the time this comes out, hopefully you'll be a little bit further along with the release. Yeah, so
it's wildliferebellion.org.
Okay.
And you'll find us all on the social media
platforms. Yeah, we can put all of that in the notes in the show.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So we just had a brief conversation downstairs, and you're involved in kind of legal wranglings with HS2. You're a presenter, an author. You have to deal with dead animals being left on your doorstep, and how do you find time for it all? And sort of a two-pronged question, really. How do you find time for it all, and where do you feel you can be most effective as a conservationist?
That's a good question. I think I'm still, to answer the second part of that question, I'm still finding out. I've got to maximize my efficacy because I'm 58 years old and I'm running out of time, very conscious of that. So I constantly monitor how efficient I am and whether I'm maximally doing things. And so I'm very critical about that, to be honest with you. How do I find the time? Well, luckily I don't sleep very much. I never have done. So, at the moment I'm probably on about 4.5 hours, and it's been particularly grim the last week. So I've not been sleeping very much at all. But which means I get things done. A lot of thinking, a lot of writing, all that sort of stuff. When in the what is for other people is the dead of the night, is actually a very productive time for me. But then the other thing is that I'm not good if I'm not busy. I realized a long time ago that I get quite stressed if I'm not. If I'm very task orientated, and if I don't need the task to be set by others, I don't mind if it is, but I set my own task, and then I have to see them to completion, and I have to do them properly. So it suits me to be busy. My partner thinks that I redefine the words workaholic, but for me, it's about getting things done.
Sure.
And I've got to get things done.
And is she convinced by that?
No, no, she's not. She does every now and again try to intercede, and strangely, the other day, on Sunday, a couple of Sundays ago, she was in London on a course, and I came up because over Christmas we'd had problems with. We didn't really have a Christmas; it got wiped out for personal reasons, and so we thought, well, let's have a sort of a late Christmas, and so she was on a course, which meant I had the freedom of the daytime, as it were, and I actually had 2 days to go around some art galleries and look at my favourite paintings and a couple of exhibitions that otherwise I would have really wanted to have seen, and I would have ordered the catalogues online and looked at them on a train at some point. But I actually went and looked at the exhibitions, and I felt an enormous sense of guilt all weekend.
Oh no.
Sat looking at Bridget Riley for 4 hours, not answering any emails that I would have considered to be important, was quite challenging.
Yeah.
And standing again for a couple of hours looking at 2 Vermeers in the National Gallery, which I've spent a lot of time looking at during the course of my life, was a gratuitous excess of pleasure, which it was difficult to reconcile. But anyway, I battled it off, and I won't say it was an enjoyable weekend because of the guilt, but I achieved something. I saw some stuff that I really liked and I was inspired by.
And that's great, because you also need room, don't you? I mean, as you were talking there, it made me think about, so I've been working with a business advisor for the last 15 years. She's become a good friend. And one of her first questions when you have a meeting with her is, what are you going to do about time off? When are you going to take breaks? Because she knows already, and most of the people that she deals with are entrepreneurs, they're creatives, they're people that don't have a problem working hard, and they've got drive and they've got passion. The trouble is taking time off. So it sounds like those.
I don't want her number, because I can't slow down. I should have had her number 15 years ago. That would have been useful. But now there isn't time. I need to be doing what I'm doing, which is moving at 150 miles an hour every hour, really. And I try. I do, to be quite honest with you, I suppose I'm being a bit disingenuous. When I'm at home, I go out first thing in the morning, and that's governed by when it gets light. And I take my dogs out into the woods, and I walk for an hour. And that is a very important part of my life. And when I was younger, I used to think that I went to the woods because that's where all the things that fascinated me lived. And that was to a certain extent was true. But it was also, I've now recognized with the benefit of hindsight, it was about grounding myself in an environment where I feel safe, secure, where I feel like more like me than anywhere else, and where I can share my love of my dogs. And the joy of being with them in isolation, and that's very powerful. So that is building time. That is about recharging. And if I'm at home, I will do that twice a day. I will take them out, and that's become. I mean, if I'm away, I crave that. And as soon as I get home, all I want to do is go in, get the wellies on, get the leads, and go out in the woods. And again, my partner struggles with this. She wants me to sit down. I don't drink too, but sit down and see what's happened since I've been away. But I don't. I just want to get out there with those dogs, and get back into that space and get my head together.
And she knows she knows she's always going to be second to the dogs anyway. I mean, she's been with you long enough to realise that.
I'm second to some of her animals, and that's why our relationship works. You can't compete with a tiger if you're Chris Packham, I can tell you. So, I'm quite happy to play second fiddle to them,
So I recently watched your Horizon program, 7.7 billion and counting. There's pretty scary stuff in there, but also amazing. And I noted, one of the things that caught my attention was you said this feeling of responsibility that you had, or you felt somehow responsible that, the decline of species is, in terms of wildlife, is happening under your watch. I mean, I know obviously the focus of the program was about people. And I wondered, about this feeling of responsibility and how you live with it day to day when there's such a thirst for growth, when there's such a thirst for raw materials. It must be such a challenge.
Yeah. I carry a burden of an enormous amount of guilt. So when I got my first binoculars in 1970, and since then we've lost 90 million birds from the UK countryside, measured by the BTO. No ambiguity about it. Fingers on the pulse, We've seen catastrophic declines in most of our habitats. 1 in 7 of our monitored species are in danger of extinction. 50% are in decline. I mean, I got all the stats at hand, and that's happened at a time that, that I've been interested in that wildlife, and I've loved it and wanted to look after it. And then it's in a similar period, just casting the net more broadly, we've lost between 40 and 50% of the world's wildlife in that time. And when I look at some of the species that have declined very, very rapidly, they've done so in a period of time where I've been actively engaged in conservation,
right,
in some way, shape or form, whether it's just been a member of an NGO, whether it's been as a trustee or holding an honorary role with those NGOs, or whether it's, things where I've been actively campaigning, either with others or alone. We've lost. There's no question about it. We can't say that we've won. We've lost, and I'm a bad loser. So it's for me, it's highly motivating. To try and now more than ever redress, slow, repair, and restore some of that damage. I don't get eco anxiety. I know people talk about that now. I never get down about it. Maybe it's because I don't have time to get down about it. But ultimately, I'm a pragmatist, but coincidentally, at this point in time, an optimist. I think that whilst we've monitored all of those declines, we've also been developing an extraordinary arsenal of abilities to halt them. We can reintroduce species, we can restore habitats, we can effect all of these repairs. We know what to do. The problem is we haven't been doing it rapidly enough and broadly enough. That's the only issue. It's not that we're incompetent, it's that we've been lazy, and I can't live with that.
Yeah. And so these success stories, the solutions focused, you must have witnessed some of these firsthand or been involved in. Do you have examples of,
look, we've reintroduced red kites into the UK. It's fantastic. They're the only growing population in Europe now. They're a significant part of the European population. They've enthralled people. They continue to do that. It's part and parcel of re-establishing a more sustainable ecology to the UK. But at the same time, we've failed wholeheartedly to reintroduce beaver. I think there are only 2 countries in Western Europe now that haven't reintroduced the beaver, and we are one of them. We know that in terms of shaping the ecology of our landscape, they play or could play a far more important role than red kites. And the reasons that we failed are nefarious. We've got groups of people with vested interest who have done everything they can to oppose our progress. And rather than win their hearts and minds or confront them head on, we've tiptoed around them, tapping at the door, asking for permission, because that's conservation for you. That's where it's been. It's been too polite. It's been too, lacking in self-confidence. We have a skill set which is very important and will become increasingly important. We've been standing outside, knocking on the door, saying, "Oh, excuse me, it's all going to hell in a handcart out here. Is there any chance?" "Oh, okay. No, that's all right. It's fine. We'll come back later. Never mind. Sorry to trouble you." And it's like, what? And I just got fed up with that. And I still see it now. I still see that within the conservation movement. There's a terrible risk aversity. There's a terrible, everyone's looking over their shoulder. No one wants to stick their head above the parapet, and it's costing us dear. And I think we're going to need to change it.
Chris, despite this podcast evolving into conversations about conservation, a significant number of the audience are photographers, and I know that they're going to be interested in hearing about you as the photographer. As I said earlier, I just finished reading Fingers in the Sparkle Jar, brilliant book by Chris. We'll put a link to that into the notes as well. But so much of that was about your childhood experiences and finding out stuff for yourself and just going out in nature and finding and learning. And I was curious if that was how photography came around for you. Did you just pick up a camera and learn for yourself?
No, I didn't actually. I'm very keen on art and painting, and I had been. And when I was younger, a kid, my dad would take me to museums, my mum would take me to art galleries. It was a broad, sort of distinction between them. And so I spent a lot of time in art galleries, and my mum was quite imaginative when it came to sort of getting me to engage. She had a real thing for figurative art. She didn't like abstract art, which is what I really like, I suppose. It didn't matter. So at school, there were 2 things that I'm not being immodest, but I was good at. There was a lot of things I wasn't good at, but the 2 things that I was good at were art and, science. And it was always either or. And so when I left university, having studied zoology, having made that decision, I felt a bit wretched. I felt that I hadn't been reading at all, because I'd just been reading textbooks for about 10, 15 years and scientific papers. So I set about reading all of the books that I should have read. And I felt that I'd been counting this, that, and the other, and measuring this, that, and the other, but I hadn't been making anything. So when I left, I rented some lock-up garages and started making some sculptures, and I started painting, and I started going back to galleries and stuff. But I didn't have any of the techniques to be able to make what was in my mind. And I've just been playing in a punk rock band, and I thought, do you know what? This isn't going anywhere. So I sold all my gear, and I thought, what can I do which is that I can master the skills more quickly than learning to put oil paint or acrylics onto board. And mistakenly, I thought, oh, well, that's photography. All you got to do is press a button. So I sold my guitars and all that stuff, and I bought a camera and I started taking photos. And I thought, well, I'll photograph wildlife because I know a bit about it and I have a passion for it. That seemed an obvious subject. Although initially I did photograph all sorts of other things as well, but I was a bit ill-disciplined. And I soon realised, I realised immediately, I went to, I got in the car, a rusty old Renault that I had, and I drove down to the south of France with about 36 rolls of Kodachrome, each of which had 36 exposures, or if you could load it imaginatively, 38. And I came back, and when all those little yellow boxes popped through the letterbox, I'd taken 2 pictures that I thought might be of some merit. So the failure rate was catastrophic. But the 2 pictures that I took so inspired me that I thought, no, I've got to give this a go. And that was it. So
what were they?
Well, there were 2 pictures of greater flamingos in the Rhone Delta in the Camargue, and I took them within a few minutes of one another. And what was striking to me was the contrast in terms of the light and the mood and the feel. And what it immediately identified to me was that I could see something that I liked, and I could respond to it in a personal way, and I could capture that in one tiny fraction of the universe's history. Entirely personally, and I could try and make it unique. I could try and see it in a way that no one else has seen it before, and then 5 minutes later I could do it all over again, and the result would be completely different, and that excited me. So despite the catastrophic wastage of Kodachrome, I thought that's what I'm going to do. But from the very outset, I wasn't interested in mainstream natural history photography. I was always interested in taking photos that were a little bit more sort of off kilter and a bit more art centric, if you know what I mean. And that's where I drew most of my inspiration from. So I wasn't interested in illustrative photography at all. And I was always trying to sort of reinterpret things. And initially it was a lot about control. I'd be, collecting things and painting them and moving them and all that sort of stuff. And the pictures were quite surreal. I showed them to people and they just didn't know what was going on. This was the 80s, remember, and now you probably do better with those pictures. You probably, get a book contract in a day and an exhibition the next one. But in the 80s, everything was very conservative, very, very conservative. So they didn't go down too well. And,
Were you saying you were ahead of your time in the 80s?
I don't think it was just me. I think there were probably plenty of other people out there ahead of their time. It's just that no one wanted to publish those pictures, and I really struggled to get any of those sorts of pictures published. And I still have them all in those little plastic sleeves at home, and I think of them with some fondness because they took an enormous amount of effort to orchestrate and take. But ultimately, again, I think it was. I changed in my response. I began to think that. Firstly, I needed to be able to technically control what I was doing by understanding the processes of photography. And then I wanted to sort of more emotionally and intellectually connect with it as well.
And did you do that by, reading books or just trial and error? You didn't do any courses?
I read a few books.
Yeah.
I went to evening class to do some black and white photography and processing, as it was, darkroom work at that point. And then I just started looking at every photograph I could look at. So if I looked at a newspaper, I'd be looking at the photographs and how they worked or didn't work. Every single thing, every advertisement, every book. At that stage, I'd go into bookshops and I'd just go through the photographic section, just standing there looking at all the pictures. And more recently, I'd just buy books, really cheap stuff off of eBay. And I may only look through those photos once, and then the book goes into a pile and eventually ends up in a charity shop. But I started looking at and understanding how photography worked and how people were using it to convey a message. And that was, basically it was sort of, very much a sort of a self-taught thing.
Yeah. And I read that also you don't like looking at your work and find it many ways a torturous experience and well, I don't. Spending most of your time frustrated, trying to capture the perfect image. And I think it's a challenge for all of us.
I don't like my own pictures. I've got none of them on the wall. I try to like some of them for 5 minutes sometimes, but it doesn't last much longer because there's always something wrong. And I do strive for perfection, but I do look at them. I look at them in intense detail. That's one of the attributes, I think, of my slight neurological difference, is that visually I can look at things and acquire that information very rapidly and then analyze it very rapidly and then store it almost infinitely. So, I went to Southampton Art Gallery the other day. They had a retrospective of their sort of collection. And I can, when I was walking around, I'd been looking at those paintings since I was 5 years old. It's more than 50 years on and off, but I could have drawn all of them. I'm not saying I could reproduce the artistic quality, but the structure and shape of them all is just, I can remember it all. And same with photographs. So I look at a photograph, and I remember it years later. So I look at my own work and, under a microscope, which is unforgiving. And I think it's that there's a purpose to that as well. It's not just about sort of self-depreciation. It's about understanding how you can do things better next time. And that's my mission. I'm never going to be satisfied. I know that. But if I get better, then that's satisfying.
And is it different experience, when you're talking about looking at an image in that detail? When you're looking through the viewfinder, do you see the same image, than when you're back home and looking at it on your computer screen?
I do now, yeah. I didn't initially, I don't think. I do remember sort of seeing things in the frame and thought, God, how did that get there? But now, because I'm not ever preoccupied with the subject, I'm looking at the whole picture the whole time. I'm looking at, even before I think about pushing it, I'm looking at the light, I'm looking at, where I want that picture to be. And if the picture can't be there, then I don't even bother to try and get it. I'm ruthless like that, So I can wander around, with other photographers, they're all snapping away. But if I can't see something that I want and need, if the light isn't right, then I don't bother. There's no point. I know I'm not going to be satisfied. And then if I do identify some part of the environment where I think a picture can be made, I just latch onto it in an obsessional sense, and I'll just, maybe nothing happens, but at least I know where something can happen, rather than trying to force it somewhere else where it's never going to work. So if I find some tiny little patch of leaves or water or whatever it happens to be, which I see as a place where I can frame a subject if there is one, or if it needs one, then that's where I'll go, and I'll stay there for as long as those conditions last that I can make that picture.
Yeah. And so, are you still searching for the perfect image?
Well, in many different guises, yeah. I still work on projects, and and even if they're spontaneous projects, even if I'm out and I'm after something else and something crops up, I'm normally pretty ruthless about not even looking, because I stay so focused, and I also implement inflexible parameters for myself. So I'll give myself a physical space whereby I have to take the photos. I can't move outside that physical space. I like to be confined. I like rules, self-imposed rules, which I can break, but I need that sort of discipline. And then if I'm shooting and it's subject-based, say it's a particular species, everything else ceases to exist. It doesn't matter. Honestly, I was doing elephants a few years ago, and I'd never photographed elephants before, so it was a bit of a challenge. And I'd seen them and looked at pictures of elephants. I'd never found them particularly photogenic, to be quite honest with you. But, so I looked at an enormous number of pictures of elephants, and I thought, what can I do? And I came up with a couple of ideas, so I went out to try and get them. And on one occasion, I was lying there in the water, and my partner, Charlotte, sloshed up alongside me. There was nothing happening, so it didn't matter. And she said, have you seen that? And I said, what is it? She said, those two giraffes over there, they're mating. It's extraordinary. Everyone's going on about it. And I went, oh, yeah. I'm not interested. I don't want to photograph mating giraffes if I'm thinking about photographing elephants. I'm in the zone.
Yeah.
Literally.
Laser guided.
Yeah. Unswayable.
So what are you currently working on now?
Well, photographic work for me involves a lot of pre-thought and planning. So I spend a lot of time looking at pictures and thinking about pictures that I'd like to make. Not actually physically making them, but thinking about what's going to work. And that process is ongoing, and it can run for a long time, because I'm constantly searching for something new. And so there were a couple of projects I've been working on for, years, unfortunately, because I've not been able to draw a line under them. But they're not the same project that they've transformed over that period.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you were good at ending projects.
No, I'm good at ending sort of opportunities. I do have what I call stop photos. So in any particular place or with a particular part of a project, if I think that I'm going to say it now, but I struggle with the philosophy of it. But if I reasonably think that that's as far as I can go, then I have developed the ability to stop. Otherwise, I'd still be lying in a ditch somewhere in the Gambia trying to photograph a stilt. I'd be there now. So I have sort of developed the ability to draw a line under situations, but not things as a whole.
Yeah.
And I think that, for me, it's a process of, trying to exercise your imagination, and that should be an ongoing thing. It's very difficult. I always think, if you write poetry, it's never really finished. You can always tinker with it and make it better. It's just at that point when you decide to give it away to other people to look at. I'd love to rewrite that book that I wrote because there's so much of it is rubbish. And there are paintings that I've done and I do, and I want to go and do them again and again and again and again, because I know that if I do them again, I can get them better. And so, yeah, there is that. It's hard. Fortunately, I've got things that I have to do apart from take photos, so they enforce that stopping, and I think that's probably actually a healthy thing.
Yeah, and being around, photography and filmmaking for most of your life now, we're looking at photography in the role of the conservation and what it can bring. And, it comes up quite a lot in these interviews. The word conservation photographer gets bandied around a lot. And I wondered your feelings, about the power of photography these days in terms of conservation.
I think it's undeniably powerful. I don't think that, again, I'm going to be critical of it. I don't think we're using it to the maximum of our capability at the moment. And I see plenty of pictures of gruesome things, in terms of nature conservation, environmental damage, and so on and so forth. But they're not. They don't come with the same power because they're often not photographically complete. It's no good just taking a picture of a beheaded elephant. That's a dehorned rhino. You've got to do that and make it an image which is going to endure and really extol that power. And when you look at the world's most powerful photographs outside of conservation, they're great photographs. Even if they don't communicate with you, you've got no interest in what they're trying to say. Maybe it's of no historical relevance to us now at this point in time, but you can still look at them and think, do you know what? That is a great photograph. You don't know anything about the people. Maybe the topic is of no concern to you, but you're still going to look at it and think that's a great photo. And I don't see many great photos communicating that environmental message.
Yeah.
So from my point of view, when I do take photos like that, they're always planned. They're not responsive. I've been taking a series recently. We're going to use them with Wildlife Rebellion. But they're all set up. They're all things where I've designed something. They're more of an artistic exercise than a responsive thing. And I think that it's tricky. You need the right photographer in the right or maybe the wrong place to get those sorts of very powerful, enduring images. But it's something that must be explored. And ultimately, I'm being critical of it, but I didn't ought to be, because just a few years ago, there was very little of it. Everyone was just focusing on the beautiful and not on that. And people have turned their lenses there. I just think they need to do it with a little bit more intellectual rigor and technical, artistic expertise. We should be having, here's a point. Which image of all of those types of things is the most enduring in my mind? And it goes back to a Benetton ad campaign in the 80s. And it must have been after one of the Kuwait wars, that was later. So it was after an oil spill. And it was a picture of a blackneck or Savonian grebe. And the bird was entirely covered with oil, and it was sat on oily water. So basically it was an oil sculpture, except that it had its eye open. and its eye was bright ruby red. It was the only point of color in the photograph, in this horrific cameo of destruction. But as a photograph, it was just sublime. The eye, this bleeding eye in this ghastly, gloopy sculpture of damaged or dying life was really poignant.
Yeah.
And that's what we've got to be aiming at, those sorts of things. I mean, that was in the 80s, and it's years ago, and it still has that resonance with me now. I still feel the pain when I first looked at it.
Yeah, and I think that's, you mentioned about the lenses turning, and if you look at, the benchmark, like the Wildlife Photographer of the Year, which I know you've been involved in for a number of years, and they have a photojournalist award, and the conservation message is there. They have a responsibility, as this exhibition tours worldwide. They get millions of viewers. So this is, again, going back to what's the purpose of wildlife photography these days?
Well, I guess it can't be lazy. It's got to come with a message. It's got to be instigating change. I think you can still photograph beautiful things, but you've got to use them to generate a real affinity that's going to drive change.
Yeah.
Other than that, you need to be thinking about how you can use it as a tool to look after the species that or landscapes or habitats that you're photographing. There is no doubt about that. I think that pressure is on all of us. But there are still plenty of photographers who go flying around the world, pumping up and building up their carbon footprint. And all they do is take another picture of a tiger, a polar bear, a lion, and what is it achieving? They stick them on Instagram, and some of them are exquisite, and they're the sorts of photos that make you think, God, I wish I'd been there. But making you wish you'd been there is not enough. They've got to make you want to save tigers or that environment. They've got to make you want to get up and do something. So I think, again, there's the problem, I think, with wildlife photography, there's a lot of ego involved. A lot of people are driven by their self-interest. And that's why they're good at it. That's why they summon the energy to do it. That's why they get up and plow on. It's an important fuel. I understand that. But at the same time, they've got to moderate it with seeing a bigger picture. It's not just about them and their work anymore. You got away with that. You could have got away with that 30 years ago. Then it was all about you and your work and how clever you were. But now, I don't care how clever they are. I need to be looking after those animals. That needs to be part of the message.
Yeah, and that's why photography, when now I look at it as a small part of the bigger machine, with science, with campaigning, with organizations, with groups. Photography, it's a tool for communication. It's not, wow, look at my amazing picture, aren't I great? Let's see what we can do with these pictures. Can we raise some awareness? Can that turn into action?
Yeah.
That seems to be the message that's happening a lot more these days.
Okay, so it's good and bad. Wildlife Rebellion, we reached out immediately looking for resources. I don't have an unlimited library, obviously. So we reached out to a collection of photographers that I know and whose work I like and respect, And I said, this is what we're doing. Can we have your photos? And every one of them said, yes, you can. And I mean, we can't pay them for them. We shouldn't pay them for them. It's not that I'm being mean. I always give my photographs away. I've always given them to charities that want to use them,
Yeah, but Chris, you're doing a disservice to the photographers that need to earn a living out of their work.
Oh, really? Okay. But they won't have any work if we don't do that disservice, because those species will become, endangered and extinct. It's about keeping things alive. So I don't know. It's being a professional wildlife photographer now is presumably a very difficult thing to do, and there are not many of them that do it. Let's face it; they all do lots of other things. They write, they make their own books, they lead tours, they work in conjunction with NGOs and all of those sorts of things. So the idea of this pure, someone who just picks up a lens, goes out every day, takes photos and sells them they're probably extinct, aren't they? There might be one or two, but I mean, ultimately, I think that everyone has had to expand their repertoire of skills and means of generating an income. And it's not just about the value, i.e. the dollar-pound value of their photographs. It's about so much more. And all the gallivanting around the world, well, it's going to have to change. People are not going to be tolerant of it, of generating a massive carbon footprint, which is ultimately destroying very rapidly the things that they're going to see. So that model will have to change. And, I'm hopefully working this year with a travel company to lead a photographic safari. And our mission is to see how close to carbon neutral we can get it to be. And we've got independent people that are going to scrutinize it independently. And we're going to look at what that means for anyone who books that tour. What does it actually mean? What do they have to do as participants? Because it's not just about paying the money anymore and turning up at the airport. It's about what they do getting to the airport, what they do whilst they're away. We're going to fly. Is there any justification in carbon offsetting what we do? We're going to ask those really critical questions. And I think that the reason I'm keen to do it is because I want to wake up the eco-tourist business who thinks that it's business as usual and everyone's just going to carry on doing it, and they're not. Went off because people like me are not going to let them. We're on there.
Can we already find out about this trip? Is this something that's happening this year?
Well, hopefully it will be happening in September of this year. Yeah. So basically, it's a trip that's been run before, so that gives us a sort of a datum point, so we can give all the data from previous trips to the carbon scrutinizers, and they can look at it, and then they can offer suggestions, very obviously, as to what we do this year, and then we're going to monitor it this year. And then we'll, at the end, we'll come clean. And we all know that it's not going to be carbon neutral. But, the point is we're going through a transition, and we have to encourage people to move in the right direction at their own pace. So there's no point in being critical of people. We should be encouraging them when they do the right thing. But at the moment, doing the right thing is taking quite a long time for some people. So I'm keen to encourage them by showing that it can be done,
And what are the primary things that you do for offsetting?
Right. So in terms of this project, I think that what we'll be doing is looking at two things. Well, firstly is reducing the impact, at the coalface. So where we're going to stay, they grow all their own food locally. They've got their own greenhouses. They grow all their own vegetable. Everything is locally sourced. It's solar powered, so you don't have unlimited power when you're there. So you have to charge your batteries when you're told to charge your batteries, because when the solar runs out, you aren't taking any more photos. And we'll be looking at that. But we're still charging around in diesel Land Cruisers. But we're going to look at the mileage of that and see how should that be limited? Do we shape a different type of experience based around a lower diesel footprint using those vehicles? Is there a more efficient way of using those vehicles? So we're going to critically analyse it. I mean, there's an enormous amount, but as much as we can to see what positive steps we can take. And I think that we'll find that there'll be a lot of easy wins, because there always are, that have just been overlooked. And then I think we're going to be facing and confronting some very difficult problems where it's going to be hard to overcome them. But we're going to be honest about it, publish it all, and hopefully send a message out to the eco-tourist community that there are plenty and an increasing number of clients who will want to reduce their carbon impact.
Yes.
So they will expect the companies that they travel with and the guides that they use to be doing the same.
Yeah, because they'll be scrutinizing as well.
Yeah, let's hope so, because business as usual across the board in every aspect of our lives is not a viable option at this point. We've got to change our minds and our practices. And my job is to instigate people to think about how they can change and then encourage them when they do.
That brings me on to the vegan movement, which has grown exponentially, well, just in the last couple of years. And it's funny, when I started this podcast, there weren't really many vegan wildlife photographers around, and I didn't really want to mention it through fear of alienating my audience right off the bat. But, slowly, conservationists and wildlife photographers, filmmakers, the festivals that, organize all these events are looking at that and having conversations, and you can start to see the change. And I know you yourself are vegan for how long now?
About nearly nudging 18 months, 2 years, really, because I kind of did it before I publicly did it.
What were your motivations?
I've always had, I mean, I've been vegetarian for, way back since my 20s, pretty much soon after I had a choice. Then, and animal welfare has always been one of them. Farm animal welfare I've always had concerns about. Personal health, I think, I suppose, as you get older, you start to think about that. Not that I think about it terribly hard, to be honest with you. But environment, undoubtedly, has come to the fore. And, I believe what the science says, and the IPCC have spoken. They say the world's eating too much meat. They've explained very clearly, and it's quite simple for, someone with even a fundamental understanding of ecology to see why we're, eating too much meat is damaging to the planet. So therefore, it's about cutting back. And I'm in a position, living as I do and where I do, to be able to cut out meat completely. There are plenty of people in the world who can't be vegan. You wouldn't suggest to a sub-Saharan African child that they become vegan. They would probably die. So that doesn't work. But it's not about, saying that they must or mustn't. It's about doing what we can, making the choices that we have available to us, and therefore we have to make the best informed decisions given our position, our place, and our knowledge. And so there was no ambiguity about it. I can afford to be vegan. I can be vegan and healthy, and for me, that's an important choice. Am I a didactic hyper-vegan? Am I one of those people who sees it as a cult and despises everyone else that eats meat? No, I'm not. But what I say to people, if I'm asked, then is if you eat meat, just eat less. And that's progress, and you'll get my vote for making that progress. If you eat it 7 days a week, cut to 5. If you eat it 7 and cut to 3, spend on the meat the money on the 3 days that you do eat. That money that you would have spent on the other 4 by sourcing that meat locally from a sustainable, good quality, livestock grower, local to you. And you'll probably find that you get better quality meat. I presume, I'm eating it for so many years, I don't know what it tastes like, but it will probably taste better. And you'll put your pound in the pocket of a local farmer, and that farmer will probably be doing better for the environment than some ghastly industrial unit where you've bought cheap meat down the supermarket because you want to eat it every day. So cutting back and transitioning is about what we're about. And equally, if you said to me, Chris, you've got a magic button in front of you, you can get rid of all of the meat farming in the UK if you press that button, I wouldn't press it. I don't want to put huge numbers of people out of work. Quite significant parts of our landscape actually and bizarrely are better off in terms of biodiversity due to some livestock farming. If you had a button there and it said you can end industrial farming and all of those hideous aspects of farm animal welfare, then I'd press the button straight away. But, I think we've got to encourage farming to change its mind, and it's very reluctant. I've been looking at, material coming out this week from the NFU and talk about, misrepresenting the future of their members. It's ghastly. I think the NFU should just pop down to Greggs and look at the sales of their vegan slices.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Look at the fact that Hellmann's have brought out vegan mayonnaise, that KFC and McDonald's are doing vegan things. I mean, the writing is on the bloody wall. Help your members transition. Don't stick your head in the sand and think it's going to be the same tomorrow. It isn't. And that's where I get really frustrated. These people should be proactively, facilitating change and asking for our help. I'm very keen to help farmers through that transition and support them. And I do everything that I can, to do that. And I think a lot of other people would too. I mean, look, let's face it. We produce lamb in the UK and have been doing so for a long time. It's a very heavily subsidised industry, the sheep industry in the UK, i.e. taxpayers' investment is massive. Why in 2020 are we still able to buy New Zealand lamb when we go to a supermarket? This is meat that we have no control over its production and what quality is involved. And then we ship or fly it literally halfway around the world. And we buy it instead of supporting our local farmers. The whole thing is just insane. So I think, let's all just move in the right direction at whatever pace suits you. but there's no ambiguity about what is the right direction, and that's it. And if you can and you want to make that choice of going vegan, then do it. But equally, don't try and force it on other people.
No, and that's where vegans get, a bad rap.
Yeah,
because,
they do.
You've got you mentioned the vegan police. They come out, you're a bad vegan because you're not doing X, Y, and Z. But a good friend and a real influence on me was a lady in America called Colleen Patrick Goodrow, said this great thing: don't do nothing because you can't do everything.
Yeah.
You just have to do something.
Yeah, I got a load of stuff the other day because I was wearing a down coat. Well, I bought that down coat, for your information, in the 1980s, and it's still going. It was a very expensive coat, and it's still going strong. Now, do you want me to just go and chuck it into landfill, and buy something else and therefore increase consumption, or do you want me to think, if that coat wears out and finally dies, then what do I do? Well, then I've got a choice, because my world has changed and my mind has changed. I can go to the shop and I can think, do I want another down coat or do I want a man-made fabric coat? And then I can investigate the validity of those man-made fabrics. It's not about denying and burning your history. It's about thinking about your future.
Chris, we're going to slowly come to an end here. And I ask all my guests, moving back into the world of wildlife photography, and for younger people getting into it, or people wanting to transition. I have many people come on my workshops that I run on Hampstead Heath that want a career change and they're interested in it. What kind of advice would you give to someone wanting to embark on a career in wildlife photography today?
I think it's all about, if you want to take it really seriously, if you're doing it for pleasure and it's a leisure activity, then that's fine, of course. But I don't use the F word. It's the one that starts with F and then it has a U in it and then an N at the end. I don't do that word. It doesn't exist for me. I'm not interested in it. I have to have a purpose. So I'm not going out to take photos because I think that'll be nice, something nice to do for the afternoon. I can't, that's not me. That's what I can't do that sort of stuff. So if you're going to take it seriously, then you'll want to succeed at it. And you'll want to continue to improve. So I think you've got to be ruthlessly self-critical of your own work. People text me and they email me and they say to me, I've got a brilliant photo. And I think, well, it's probably good, but I bet I can find something wrong with it. And then I think to myself, if I took a brilliant photo, what would I do the next day? I'd just have to chuck all my gear in the bath and turn on the taps because it would be pointless going on. So I think a degree of personal dissatisfaction is an important ingredient. Be ruthlessly critical. But ultimately, to succeed, if that's what you want to do, if you want to, then you need to find your own niche. You need to do what nature does, and that is avoid competition in order to find its own niche, to develop its own species. And so to do that, you have to look at all the other niches. So you have to look critically at what everyone else is doing, and you have to critically analyze them, and you have to think, how can I fit in here? How can I find a gap to do things or see things in a way that other people aren't seeing them? And there are many ways you can explore that. You can, use different equipment, you can use technology, you can use different equipment in a different way at a different time, or you can see things in a different way at a different time and whatever. There's a multitude of ways that you can find your own niche, but I think that's what you need to strive for. You need to identify what that is. It's not a random process. I wouldn't go out and just start pressing the button and thinking it will evolve. I think for me, photography has a very strong intellectual component. It's a thinking thing. It's not so much a physical thing as a thinking thing. And then when you've gone beyond the thinking, it becomes the feeling. And that's the result of all of that thinking. When you're in that place where you are going to make that choice, one choice that you're going to make in the entire history of the universe, and only you are in that position to make it. When you press that button, you've got to have done all of the hard work in advance, because that's a very important moment when you press that button. I always see that. It's a privilege to be able to capture something, and you want to do it right. So you've got to have thought about it. So yeah, I would say that those were the key things. And then one last bit of advice, but I give this advice to everyone, and that is buy an alarm clock, because you need to be awake. You need to be up and doing things when other people aren't. And that's one surefire way of making progress more quickly than everyone else.
Yeah.
So get up and get on with it.
And that's the joy of it as well, when you're out when no one else is.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's a moment of sort of selfish creation. And I live in a world like most other people where we are obliged to work in teams for a compromised objective. And very often making compromises can be creative because we work in good teams with people that add to our skills and therefore expand our capacity to maximize our efficacy and success. So that's the benefit of being in a good team. But ultimately for me, as I'm fortunate to work in good teams, but I still want that ability to make something which is entirely a reflection of my own capabilities, mind, place, time, and everything else, And that's why for me, of all the things that I do, wildlife photography, even over sort of what you might call creative writing, is because it's so much more difficult, is the ultimate challenge. You're confronted with reality, with a subject which you maybe be able to control a little bit, but not ultimately be able to direct. And you're battling with every aspect of that reality, the elements, the animal, the place, the time, everything. And so achieving success is just so hard that it's the ultimate challenge, and therefore it's ultimately alluring. It's the thing that I crave most.
And what about, where can we see current work? Are you?
Well, I'm not very good at showing off current work, actually. No, I mean, I see, again, if I'm honest with you, the reason for that is that I looked at my Instagram the other day because I was looking at something else, and I clicked onto the homepage and I hadn't uploaded any pictures for like over a year. I've been working a lot. I've taken loads of pictures. It's not an expression of my ego. It's a very personal thing. It's something that I do for myself. As you've already poignantly pointed out, I don't make money out of it. I've never been able to make any money out of it. I've given up on making money. I've just sold a load of lenses to pay for another lens. And even then, I think I was out of pocket. So, I just know that it's throwing good money after bad. I'm not ever going to break even on my wildlife photography.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't want to chastise you. It's just something that we talk about quite a lot.
I understand it. I understand it. But, so it's... So I don't need to. I don't need people to see my work.
Yeah.
But they're going to see it tonight. I'm leaving you now, and I'm going to go and give a talk. Actually, not about wildlife photography, but obviously I'll be using my photographs. And I do give talks about wildlife photography, and I use that as a means of talking about my neurodiversity, because of the way that I approach it in probably slightly different way. So it achieves a sort of double purpose there, really. And I use that as a means because I'm quite extreme when I'm taking photographs, and I think that many people aren't, and therefore it gives them an insight into the way that my mind works a little bit more, a little differently. So I do use the photographs, and I do show them to people, but I don't have that compulsion. It's not a show off thing for me.
You're not waiting with bated breath if you post a picture on Instagram, like, oh, how many likes am I going to get?
I've no idea how many likes I've got for any of my pictures. None of them are mine. That's the key thing. That's the key thing. And the opposite is true, you see, because I'm always on Instagram looking at other people's pictures. I forget to post my own because I'm so busy looking at other people's. And I follow a whole guild of Scandinavian photographers who I find it, and it's really difficult because virtually every day I open Instagram and I look at it and I just walk in a circle, stamping on the ground, swearing, because they've taken some remarkable image, which is absolutely gutting. And it's, and so I spend all my time looking at other people's work rather than trying to show off my own, basically. And that's why mine's not worth showing off. So.
Well, I'm sure there'll be people waiting for the next, maybe this year. Maybe you'll do another post.
No, I've got hundreds of pictures I could upload. I'll do it in the next week. Okay. So I'm going to go and do it now.
Great.
I'm going to go and put another 50 pictures up, but and then I won't be counting the likes.
Brilliant. I've got 2 more questions,
okay,
and they're not from me. So I put it out to the audience, and the first question is from Roxy. She's 24. She's living in Bristol, studying a master's in filmmaking. And her question was, what's your advice for someone who is an animal and climate activist, but also wanting to become part of the NHU, that's the Natural History Unit in Bristol? And she's concerned about going against the morals to maintain broadcaster impartiality.
Yeah. Okay, so I work for the BBC some of the time. I'm not an employee of the BBC. I'm contracted on a pretty much a day-by-day basis, basically, to work for them. And I'm constantly pushing, as we all are within our fields, for them to remain impartial. It's really important that the BBC remains impartial. We're so fortunate to have a broadcaster like that. I mean, who wants Fox News, for God's sake? You know, we've got the BBC. We will be devastated if we lose it. So I'm actually very keen to maintain that impartiality, and I work very hard because that's part of my sort of political ethos. So although I challenge them to take it to the line, I never want them to cross that line. But I mean, I hate to say it, but who needs the BBC? You can, and as I have done, you know, do a lot of work outside that on social media platforms where you can get enormous traction and where you can say what you think about what's right and what's wrong. And I think that there is, at the moment, a degree of confusion about what is impartiality and what is ethically and morally right and what is right and wrong. And that confusion is leading to some poor judgments where the truth is not being told. And this is not just about the BBC. This is also about our other terrestrial broadcasters. Some are better than others, but BBC, ITV, frankly, you know, look at the coverage of the last election. There were questionable things happening. But you can moan about it, or you can just bypass it. And I would say to Roxy, bypass it. You have the capability of making films on your phone, which can express your views adequately. And I'm sure you've got better equipment than your phone. And then you can post them on social media. And if you post them into a community that's receptive, you can get them seen by hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. So, you know, I love working for the BBC. I work with people there who are the best in the business, and I achieve certain objectives. I don't achieve all of them, and those that I can't achieve at the BBC, I strive to achieve outside. So I would take that sort of approach to it. You know, we don't have to agree about everything all the time, but you know, we've both got missions, and that's what I would do. Use other platforms, you know, and then, I mean, the thing about one of the reasons why Roxy should pursue, you know, working there is to get the experience of working with those people. I mean, they're enormously capable, the best in the world. We know that. So in terms of honing her skills and developing those skills, there wouldn't be a better place to be. And I've had an enormous privilege of working with those people, and they've, you know, given me a far greater understanding of the media and how it works. And we are very receptive to young people. I'm 58 now, so I'm one of those people who's sort of constantly coaxing young people and, you know, showing them what's the best way to do things, how to cut corners, how to make things work, and so on and so forth. So, it's a very generous and giving community. So I would continue to try and work there, but don't think that it will satisfy all your desires when it comes to campaigning. It's very right and proper that the BBC is not a campaigning organisation. It mustn't be. Otherwise, it's Fox News, and we don't want that.
Thank you. So next question is from Josh, 43, conservationist, lives in Hanoi, Vietnam. Who would win in a fight between a shark and a Rottweiler in a shallow lake?
Well, bull sharks in shallow water are amongst the most dangerous sharks in the world. Everyone imagines you're going to lose your life to a great white in a deep ocean. It would be an enormous privilege. I can't think of a better way to go, frankly, but it's far more likely. And as we know from bull sharks, which will go way up into fresh water and frequently, you know, take prey there, and then occasionally they will attack people in shallow water too. So a Rottweiler versus a bull shark in shallow water is a one fish race. It's the shark without a shred of a doubt. You know, the Rottweiler would be so badly damaged after the first bite that it wouldn't be worth making one of its own. I like dogs a lot, but I wouldn't put one in the water anywhere near some bull sharks.
His real question was, okay, so how do we convince schools, their governors, ministers of education to get more wildlife and conservation into kids' learning and early experiences, and not just classroom-based learning, which is needed, but out in the forest too.
Yeah, well, I think that, again, it's a point that I will be making, actually, when I speak in a moment. It's about contact. You've got to put young people into contact with nature. They've got to be able to smell it, hear it, see it, feel it for themselves. There isn't any other substitute. We can interest people in natural history using television and other media, but we can't satisfy them. That satisfaction only comes from being in the field and having those very personal moments and engagements. And of course, it's incredibly important when people are at a formative age, when they're young and they're meeting those things for the first time. And I think what we've denied young people all around the world is that ability to meet nature. We've made nature into a dirty, dark, and dangerous thing. We've locked them up indoors because we think that the internet is more enriching for them, but in fact, it's darker and more dangerous than the forest and the woods. So I think that within schools, it's about giving those people the freedom to explore nature for themselves, and that means that they have to see it as a positive thing. And very often here in the UK, I see people, I see young school children out, and they're all wearing high-vis jackets. Well, we wear high-vis jackets in dangerous environments. Why are kids wearing them when they go for a walk in the woods? That's sending the wrong signal to young people. That's saying this is a dangerous environment. You must put this high-vis jacket on. The next thing that happen is they pick something up, like a beetle or a worm or a newt, frog, and immediately the teacher or helper is rushing over and squirting their hands with hand gel, bacteriological hand gel. And again, that's sending a message that this is something which is potentially harmful to you. Well, let me tell you, these hands have picked up an enormous number of things that they probably shouldn't have picked up. And when I was a kid, my mum would say, wash your hands. And I would always say, I will do one day. And I haven't yet, and I'm still alive, So I think it's about allowing them the freedom and space to explore nature at their own pace, in their own time, in their own company, and then encouraging that fascination. And outside of school, that rings true for every other group. It's the freedom of being able to do what you want and find out yourself that we've denied them, and that's the only way forward. I think that's the only way you're going to get that deep-rooted affinity for nature, and certainly here in the UK, I don't know what it's like there, but here in the UK, it's got really bad. I live in the middle of a 328-acre woodland, and I've walked there with my dogs every day for the last 12, 13 years, and I've never, on any occasion, seen a child at all.
Wow.
Not making a camp, building a bonfire, shooting birds with their air rifle or a catapult, catching grass snakes, nothing. And yet, 50 years ago, if I'd lived next door to that woods, I'd have been in there every day, climbing trees, making swings, catching newts, watching the foxes, doing all that stuff. And now they're extinct. We talk about all the species of other animal that are going extinct. The young British naturalist is very much in danger of extinction because they're just not allowed out of their bedrooms.
Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to...
Not at all.
You tell us all your stories, and it's really exciting what you're currently up to. And we will put all the links
Thank you.
to Wildlife Rebellion and various other campaigns that you're involved in. And hopefully we'll see some more pictures on Instagram this year.
Okay, I'll dig them out. They're not great. I've been doing a few things. Yeah, I mean, again, people struggle to identify what they're of. Really, that's the problem. I've gone really quiet. I've been doing. I'll tell you what. One last thing. I know we want to finish, but I mentioned about the need to explore technology, maybe to find a new niche. And for a long time, I looked at people using infrared cameras, and they're generally taking the same sorts of photographs.
Yes.
So sort of big skies, big dark skies, foliage all gone white. Particularly popular in Kenya and Tanzania and those sorts of things. And I thought to myself, do you know what? I've never seen people doing macro with infrared, or very rarely. I can't think of any. Maybe flowers, infrared flowers, that sort of thing. So I've bought a camera. I sold a lot of gear, and I've bought actually a mirrorless camera. I thought I'd give it a go. And they are actually easier to work with when you adapt them for infrared. So I did that. And I borrowed one previously, and I took some pictures, and I sort of did the usual stuff, and then I started exploring. And now I decided to, make the leap. So I bought the camera. Once it's converted, as you know, that's it. It's not going back. So it's quite a gamble. Cameras aren't cheap. And I bought a new one, and I've just had it converted. It arrived today. So I'm going to open it, and I'm going away next week. I'm away for 12 days. And as a point of discipline, I mentioned my need to have discipline. I'm not taking a conventional camera at all. I'm just going to take the infrared.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use the infrared for everything that I would normally want to do with a conventional camera. And I'm sure some of it will be unsuitable, and I will therefore fail, and I'll be cursing that decision. But also, I think I might find things where, it might work, and where people haven't tried using that media before. So that's my latest project, and I've been doing quite a bit with the borrowed camera, infrared camera, and it's just good.
Are you happy with the results so far?
I'm not happy, but I'm finding. I think it's going to be interesting.
Yeah,
I think it's going to be interesting, and I think there are things to be done. It's identifying what they are, and it's quite difficult to predict. That's the other thing I quite like about infrared. So, one other point is that it likes contrast. So typically, we like to shoot in our magic hour, which is relatively short.
Especially in East Africa.
In East Africa. But then the rest of the day is horrible light. But in fact, magic hour, I noticed, was particularly poor for infrared.
Right.
But you could shoot through the rest of the day. And at 12 midday with the ghastly light, that camera was loving it. It was loving all of that contrast.
All the high contrast, yeah.
Yeah. And so it gave me an extended shooting time. But I'm going to be shooting it here in the UK, where we don't quite have the same light conditions, as you know. But I still think that I can't wait to get out into my own woods and see how that infrared is going to work. So I've got plans to photograph woodland spring flowers using that infrared camera, and so that's my springtime project. So I might put some of those on Instagram.
Brilliant. And then hopefully all the Scandinavian photographers will be stomping around their living rooms, cursing, why didn't I have this idea?
Maybe. They're so good, honestly. So good. All right.
Brilliant, Chris. Thanks so much again.
You're welcome.
And good luck with your talk tonight.
Thank you.
And we'll keep the conversation going through links and following Wildlife Rebellion and the uptake in that. And we'll hopefully get you back on.
Okay. Thank you.
Many thanks again to Chris. What a total joy it was to spend some time hearing about everything he's working on. And I love his highly critical approach to photography. That's certainly stuck with me, and I'll be taking this advice along on my next shoot for sure. And what an inspiration when it comes to campaigning. Unrelenting. So you heard, don't be lazy. Get out there and join Wildlife Rebellion. The website, soon to be released, is wildliferebellion.org. On Twitter, it's Wildlife RBLN. Instagram is Wildlife Rebellion. And on Facebook, simply search for Wildlife Rebellion. All the links are on Chris's page in the podcast section of my website, matthewmoran.com. So head over there to spread the word. And please spare a few minutes to leave a review on iTunes. It helps to get what are now really important messages to a much wider audience. It's also available on Stitcher and Google Podcasts now too, so look that up. If you'd like to come on a photography workshop with me on Hampstead Heath, keep an eye on my website. At the time of recording this, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 issues, so I've had to cancel a bunch of my workshops, hoping to go again in the autumn. And new for this year, I've teamed up with my good friend Eddie Ephraim's and previous guest on this podcast. Together we're running a series of photography and bookmaking workshops, kind of an extended version of my one-day workshops. This will be over 3 weekends with plenty of time for photography, but also you will get to go away with a beautifully hand-bound book at the end of your weekend's work. So more information about that and my other workshops can be found on my website. Just visit the workshops page and it would be great to see you there. And if you can't make it along to a workshop, but would like to buy one as a gift for a friend or loved one, there are vouchers available. You can just visit my shop at matthewmoranshop.com. And there we also have books, cards, prints, calendars, all sorts of good stuff related to my work. All right. Thanks again for listening. I've got more fabulous guests lined up for the spring and summer. So stay inside, Stay tuned, and we'll see you soon.